people would, often say, what period of history do you want to live in? And look, okay, I would have liked to have been at Mount Sinai. But other than that, maybe to have met Yeshua. Other than that, there's no other period of history I want to have lived in up until now, except other than today.
Right now.
Right now, this moment, we're living in a period where knowledge is increasing, as it talks about in the book of Daniel. I feel like we're living in what it describes in the book of Acts, where it talks about the restoration of all things. Can you read that, Michael?
Yeah, I
think
want to
we're
read
living
that.
in that period of history.
Because this is the disciples, and they have just healed the man who is lame. He's at the Nicanor gate, the beautiful gate, and now they're speaking to the people, and speaking and saying, the times of refreshing shall come from the presence of Yehovah, and he shall send Yeshua, Messiah, which before was preached unto you, whom the heaven must receive until the times of the restitution or restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of the holy prophets since the world began. This is a time that was promised. And in Nehemia, why do you see these discoveries? Why are they so important in our time? Because the Jews are looking for the coming of the Messiah. Here, these Jews were saying that the heavens must receive the Messiah until the restoration of all things.
Right.
And we're seeing things restored that we never imagined. The Gentiles could have never have imagined the stuff that's going on right now.
Well, Michael, I see this as part of a pattern, a pattern of history of restoration. And it's interesting, he doesn't just say, this isn't a new doctrine, he said. This restoration is something spoken of by the prophets. So when I hear that, I say, well, which prophets? And I look at what's happened really since starting in the 1800s, we had the return of the Jews to the land of Israel. They were scattered throughout the diaspora and began to return in large numbers in the 1800s. We have the restoration of the Hebrew language, which is prophesied in Zephaniah. We'll get to that in a minute. The return of Jewish sovereignty after 2,000 years. The liberation of the Temple Mount and the rest of Jerusalem. I mean, we have a psalm about how Jerusalem is united as a city, and it actually happened in 1967. The restoration of the calendar, the restoration now of the name, and the discovery of these Hebrew Gospels. I have to wonder if this isn't part of this whole pattern of restoration. And I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Messianic Jew, but I'm seeing these restorations of even of these ancient Hebrew documents. I think this could be part of the pattern. And it gets me excited, Michael, because I asked the question, Michael, what's next? If we've seen all these things restored in our lifetime, many of these in my lifetime, things you'd never expect to have happened. I mean, I've shared this with you before on the program about how in the 80s, the Jewish leadership was talking how it would take centuries to liberate the Jews from the Soviet Union. And now over 1 million Jews have returned. I mean, in the return of the Jews from Ethiopia, we are seeing restoration, people waking up around the world and realizing they've been called to the God of Israel. That's the Isaiah 56 prophecy. Michael, I want to read one prophecy to you. Jeremiah 32:41. This is part of what it's talking about in Acts 3:21. So what's really interesting about this verse, let me read it. And this is talking about the return of the exiles, God bringing the exiles back and planting them in their land. He says, I will rejoice over you to do good to you, and I will plant them in this land in truth with all my heart and with all my soul. And you know, Michael, in the entire Bible, it talks repeatedly about loving God with all your heart and all your soul. It's in the Shema. When they asked Yeshua what's the most important commandment, he said to them, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad, Yehovah is our Elohim, Yehovah is one. And then he says, Ve'ahavta et Yehovah Elohecha, and you shall love Yehovah with all your heart, Ubechol nafshecha ubechol meodecha, and with all your soul and all your might. And in all of the entire Bible is only one place where God says he will do something with all his heart and all his soul. And that is planting the people of Israel back in their land. So when we hear, that's not some small trivial thing. That is the only thing God ever said he'll do with all his heart and all his soul. And he's done it. It's begun to happen. It hasn't been completed. We still have millions of Jews in the diaspora and the 10 lost tribes. And so there's ways to go, but it's beginning to happen, and God does that with all his heart and soul.
Oh, that's incredible. And Jeremiah 32, this is right after he receives the revelation that his cousin is going to come in to the prison and offer for Jeremiah to buy some land, and he puts the title deeds in an earthen vessel and to bury it in that land. And he says that this is going to happen, that Israel is going to come back one day. And
I love that prophecy because I know where Jeremiah was from. I've been to that place, the village of Anatot, and it talks. I mean, it's an incredible image there. They're buying and selling land, and they're like, "You're going to want to buy land? This is worthless. The Babylonians are about to take the land."
Right, they got the siege wall around Jerusalem.
Right, you want land? I mean, it's like buying swampland in Florida, right? I mean, what would you want this for? And his point is that this prophecy will be fulfilled, and now we look back, and the prophecy has been fulfilled. Now the nations of the world don't want this. They're murmuring and they're speaking against Yehovah and against his Messiah, like it talks about in Psalm 2. They wanted to, the UNESCO has made this proclamation that the Jews have no historical connection to Jerusalem. Jeremiah wrote this, whether you believe in God or not, there's no disputing Jeremiah wrote this in around 586 BC. We know the date from archaeology. So he wrote this in 586 BC. And he's talking there about how God will do this with all his heart and soul, plant the Israelites back in their land. And UNESCO says that there's no connection between the Jews and the land. What are they talking about? I mean, it's insanity. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm in that movie with Planet of the Apes. It's a madhouse in here, a madhouse. I mean, you're dealing with the United Nations. They are delusional.
Well, they need to pass a resolution against ignorance and stupidity, but they'd have to
no
jail
members.
them all.
Right. Well, so there's another prophecy here, Michael, which is two key prophecies I want to bring. One is Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. Before I get to those, Michael, we live in this period or I'm going to save that. Remind me to come back to this, because I want to tie it all together. And we'll get to some of it in the 5th episode, which is the bonus episode. I'm so excited about that. So I'm going to share some other things.
This is going to be great.
Okay.
So we're doing a special thing, and we're not going to air it on television. It's just going to be on DVD, but it's going to be in the package of this whole thing.
And I understand people can get it on Blu-ray as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's it.
So Zephaniah 3:9 is one of the key prophecies in the Bible about the restoration of all things that he talks about in Acts 3:21. For then I will turn to the ki azefoch el amim safa brura. For then I will turn to the people's pure language, likro kulam b'shem Yehovah la'avdo shchem echad. To call all of them upon the name of Yehovah to serve him with, literally says, one shoulder. And the image there is everyone is standing shoulder to shoulder in a line, serving Yehovah together. Now, what is the image here of Zephaniah 3:9? When I read this, it's immediately clear to me that Zephaniah 3:9 is an undoing of the curse of the Tower of Babel. What happened at the Tower of Babel in Genesis is all the nations came together and they had one language, and that language was Hebrew. And what did they use that Hebrew for? They said, let's build for ourselves a name, and we'll rebel against God. And God then scattered them throughout the world and gave them different languages so they couldn't do that. And he's saying that curse will be undone, and in the end times, we'll all come together once again with a single language, with a pure language, that original Hebrew that was the language of creation. All mankind will speak that language once again, not to build for themselves a name, but to call upon the name of Yehovah, to serve him and not themselves, not to build their tower, but to build up the name of Yehovah with one shoulder. And we're in the beginning of that process, Michael. This can't happen until first the Jews restore their own language. There was this big debate in the 1800s in the Jewish world in Europe. There were 4 daily newspapers in Hebrew. People couldn't speak Hebrew, but they could read and write in Hebrew. And people said, wait a minute, this isn't our language. That's some language of some ancient prophets who are now dead. We should make Yiddish the national language of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people as a whole rejected that. They said Yiddish was the language of the exile, the language of the diaspora, the language of our slavery. We must restore the pure language of the prophets. And I believe that's part of what's going on here. This is part of the prophecy of Zephaniah 3:9. We're witnessing it happening in front of our eyes, almost in slow motion. One more prophecy, Michael. Zechariah 14, verse 9. I love this prophecy.
And this is part of all the prophets have spoken from the beginning. This is a restoration.
Right, this is what Acts 3:21 is about. If
they know this. They know this.
Absolutely. Now, I'll tell you one of the reasons I love this verse, Michael. It's actually the closing verse of the daily prayers in traditional rabbinical Judaism. Now, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, but at a certain point in my upbringing, I'm like, all these prayers, we would have prayers 3 times a day, every day. And it was prayers by rote, and I would often come at the end because I was ditching. I just couldn't do it, standing there for 45 minutes, the same prayers day after day by rote. But I would come to this, and it would be sung. It's part of the Adon Olam. V'haya Yehovah lemelech al kol haaretz. And it shall come to pass that Yehovah will be king over the entire earth. Bayom hahu Yihiyeh Yehovah echad. And on that day, Yehovah will be echad. He'll be one, ushemo echad. And his name will be one. And the rabbis in the Talmud talk about this. I only discovered this later, that in the Talmud, they say, what does this verse mean, his name will be one? And I talk about this in my book, Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence. What does it mean his name will be one? They say, today in the exile, we call upon, instead of saying Yud-He-Vave, we say Adonai. And in the end times, we'll all call upon the name, the entire earth, all mankind. His name will be one. We won't read the letters Yud-He-Vave and speak them as Adonai. We'll speak them the way they're written, with those vowels, Yehovah. And in my teaching I did, and this is in the Gentiles shall know my name teaching, I bring the source Rabbi Jacob Bachrach from the year 1890, who brings this verse and brings the Talmudic passage. And he says, when it says that we'll read it the way it's written, it means with the vowels, which proves back then they knew what the vowels were, and these are still the true vowels, Yehovah. And so what I see happening is that this explosion of information is part of the fulfillment of this prophecy to restore the name, restore the language, restore the people, and just restore the truth. It's part of the restoration of all things.